Wow, good evening. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here. I actually started my career, it turns out, in pharmaceutical science. If I have my first slides up. I grew up in the DC area, and when I was a high school student, spent some time at the National Institutes of Health. And can you go to my slides, please? Worked on making the first monoclonal antibodies to the IgE receptor. And I had this idea one day in AP chemistry that we could use these antibodies to bind to the IgE receptor and block its reaction. So to make a long story short, I made FAB fragments, I got it to block histamine release in the dish, and then finally in the animal systems, won the county science fair, won my science international portions, and said we should take this to humans, but there was no humanized monoclonal antibodies yet. So I published it in Journal of Immunology. Can I have my slides? After that was kind of forgot about it until I was called as a medical student at Stanford by Genentech. They said, when did you publish that? Because they were in a patent dispute with another company, and it turned out that whole idea turned into Xolair. And I didn't know anything about IP or protecting anything, and I went to give a talk to Genentech and asked them for my royalty check, and they just laughed at me. But that was my start in pharmaceutical science. We're going to talk about technology in the future of healthcare. I'm wondering if my AV technology works. Oh, it's there. Incredible. Yeah. I thought it was for you over there. Technology works. Well, this is the NIH. Here's my first little paper, and that was the drug that kind of came out of that. So before we look into the future, and there's a lot of things happening, both in everything from wellness, diagnostics, and therapy, and the future of pharma and biopharma and drug development, let's take a little bit of a look back to the future. I spent, as was mentioned, my medical school at Stanford, then was lucky to train at Massachusetts General Hospital, great institution. Was back there a couple years ago for the 200th anniversary of MGH. Had a chance to reunite with my house staff, the guys and girls I trained with, and when we were still residents. We actually worked more than 80 hours a week, and we could joke about walking uphill both ways in the snow. And I found myself one night in one of the most, after a reception there, all to myself in one of the most famous spots of healthcare history. It's called the Ether Dome, and you can still visit it today. It's called the Ether Dome because in 1846, this very patient in this picture was the first to get general anesthesia, kind of drug therapy, for a surgery. Before that, they literally used to bite the bullet. This picture is clearly before HIPAA laws. And if you go to the Ether Dome today, you see exactly pretty much frozen in time like it looked in 1846. You can see the actual sponge in the case, the actual instruments. It's frozen in time. I wandered 4 minutes down the hall to the ward where I spent my first month as a brand new terrified young intern at Mass General, and to my shock and dismay, that was also frozen in time from the mid-90s. Some of the same alarms were beeping, some of the same nurses, some of the same patients. The only difference was the poor intern on call had to type out an electronic medical record, put it in the paper chart, and the front desk was still using the cutting-edge medical communication technology, the fax machine, right? So here we are at man's greatest hospital, great institution, but we're still in many ways practicing healthcare like we have since 1846, in old silos and old definitions and old fiefdoms and departments and specialties that have been kind of locked in stone for many years. But we're now in this new connected age, this digital age. It shouldn't be that we have to wait 37 minutes on average for our 12-minute doctor visit. We can rethink and reimagine healthcare out of the usual bucket of body parts and subspecialties. And the pharma world can think outside of that, I think, as well, and rethink and reimagine how we can use technologies and other new thinking to address some of the big challenges that we have across healthcare, whether that's the huge costs, 18% of our GDP, the aging demographic, access to care. No matter what you think about Obamacare, there's a huge shortage of physicians in many parts of the country. I woke up this morning and flew from India, actually, and there's a country with a lot of disparity, and many towns and villages have no access to care. We're in the age of big data. But how does that data actually become actionable to us as individuals, as patients, as physicians, as folks doing clinical trials? It's just a lot of information. We want it to be actionable. A lot of the data is fragmented, and we still have our friends at the FDA who don't often know how to leverage some of these new technologies, and our friends, the payers, who don't often know how to necessarily value it or pay for it. Because there's some real fundamental shifts happening that are going to be important for all of us to understand. Today we don't really practice healthcare, we practice sick care. We're on the right side of this equation. We spend most of our dollars on chronic disease and often the last couple months of life, as opposed to where the incentives are starting to shift to the left side of the equation. So instead of just fee-for-service or incentive or instead of evidence-based medicine, we're often practicing reimbursement-based medicine. And those reimbursements, though, are starting to shift across the healthcare industry. And we can shift from our model of intermittent and reactive healthcare to one that's more continuous and proactive. Because today we're intermittent. We get intermittent data, whether that's a blood pressure check, a lab data, EKG. Often that data is fragmented and it's scattered amongst other places. And we're reactive. We wait for the heart attack or the stroke or the lump to be large enough to feel before we take initial action. We're also shifting our thinking about where healthcare happens. It's not just in the ICU and the ER and the clinic. Healthcare is increasingly coming out of the clinical setting into our homes, and technology is even taking that into our own bodies. And that's going to be a major shift in how we do clinical trials, how we understand our own bodies, and beyond. In fact, Walmart says they want to be the biggest healthcare provider. You may be going to your Walmart in the future for your healthcare. Now, two overlying things are impacting that as well. Transparency. Now you can tell which pharmacy on the same street maybe charges for which drug, or how one physician is doing compared to another, or which one hospital down the street is charging for the same procedure and their outcomes. So this new era of transparency will shift things as we go forward. So new values, new incentives across the industry are going to change things. And if we keep those in mind and layer those with some of the new technologies coming in mind, we have a real opportunity to reinvent things. Now, part of that reinvention comes through technology. Technology is not the only answer, but it's an enabler. And think about how fast the world's moving. It was only 2001 that the first, magical iPod came out. That was not that long ago, and that certainly changed the trajectory of companies like Apple. And actually, I have in my pocket an antique. It's the iPhone 1. It still works, but if you had to have an iPhone 1 today, it'd be slow and clunky and a low-resolution camera. But technologies like this are infused with Moore's law, the power of computation, which is why the smartphones in most of your pockets have about 1 billion times the price and speed of the best supercomputers in the mid-1970s, or your tablets are more powerful than a Cray supercomputer. And it's this exponential thinking, the doubling in speed and things getting faster, cheaper, and better that we all need to pay attention to as we look to change pharma, to change clinical care, clinical trials, and beyond. Now, of course, it's not just Moore's law that's getting faster and cheaper and more accessible. It's many technologies, from big data to 3D printing to robotics. And it's at their convergence point where they come together that we can reimagine all sorts of elements. Just a few examples of reimagination and reinvention in the last decade. Amazon's disrupted itself. They sell more ebooks than regular books. When was the last time you went and rented a videotape? Blockbuster's gone bust. When was the last time you went to a travel agency? How many people here use something like Uber? Any Uber fanatics here, right? That company's only 4 years old. It's already worth over like $18 billion. They didn't invent the mobile phone, mobile communication, maps, GPS, payments, but they shifted and are disrupting the taxi and the limo world to the point where I used to like to ask the question, who's going to build the Uber of healthcare? I tweeted that out, and about 3 companies wrote back saying, we're building it. You can press a button on your smartphone and a doctor will come to your home in New York or LA. Not sure what kind of doctor, but remember, you can rate them and they can rate you, so there's this transparency element. But that kind of sensibility is coming to healthcare. And even Uber, just last week, announced Uber Health. They did a little pilot where on your Uber app, you could press a button and get Uber Health, in this case, to come and give you a vaccination. So new ways of delivering and new ways of paying, all embedded. So how are you going to rethink the future of pharmaceutical science is going downstream? How do you avoid not being the next Kodak, which actually invented digital photography but didn't really pay attention to its exponential trajectory till they went bankrupt and Instagram was sold for $1 billion a couple years ago. So look to be the disruptor, not the disruptee. As we move forward, we want to avoid Pharmageddon and reinvent the world in a powerful way. Okay, there's enough scary talk for you. Let's look at a few exponentials that are set to start really shifting things. One is personalized genetics. The price and speed of sequencing a genome has dropped to twice the rate of Moore's law. Today it's about $1,000 a genome, and a couple years will likely be $100 as a genome. You can actually spit in a tube today and drop your spit in the mail. Your saliva cells, your cells can be analyzed for a couple $100. Companies like 23andMe, and yes, they're having FDA issues, but you can get 2 million base pairs analyzed and have a lot of information about your pharmacogenetics. Now, that's huge information that's actually useful today. It's not yet embedded in the clinical systems in many powerful ways, but that will be part of shifting how we dose and pick our drugs. And what happens when you have your genome in the cloud or on a drive and you bring it to your doctor? How are they going to make sense of that? There's still implications how we meld this big data and make it useful. Now, of course, it's not just the human genome that's getting more accessible. There's the human proteome, 10,000 biomarkers from your blood, environmental data, the exposome, biomarkers, the microbiome. It turns out we're all actually superorganisms. We have 100-fold more bugs in our GI system than human cells. And it's turning out playing an important role in inflammatory bowel disease, in Crohn's, in obesity, in C. difficile. And now, as my old institution, MGH, has now published a way to do fecal transplants in a nicer and friendlier manner. And we're at the point where now you can send your swabs in the mail for $89 and have your own microbiome sequenced and crowdsource that information and share it. So lots of new omics, which leads us beyond personalized and precision medicine to this world that's often called P4 medicine by Dr. Lee Hood, the founder of systems medicine. This idea that we can be predictive. Soon our kids will be born and be sequenced even in utero, so we can be predictive about their healthcare trajectory. We can take preventative steps based on that genomic information. That prevention can be personalized. And the final P, which we can all play a role of, is being participatory. We can elect to share some of our data between pharma companies, between hospitals, between academics in ways that are much more powerful and speed up discovery. We can leverage other exponentials, like the speed of imaging, for example. We now see incredible ability to reconstruct CT or MRI data on your tablet, and enables the interventionalist, the surgeon, to be much more specific and targeted, whether it's a tumor or avoiding a blood vessel. Or the world of neuroscience is being unlocked by high-speed imaging, not just the anatomy of the brain, but the amazing connectome, which we're learning plays a role in everything from understanding and maybe treating autism to Alzheimer's. And with high-speed imaging today, you can be in an MRI scanner, and the MRI, with some reconstruction of the data, can actually figure out what you're actually viewing, a picture or a movie. So incredible ability now to look inside our brains and understand its wiring, and maybe be more proactive about some major challenges, like Alzheimer's. Once Alzheimer's is usually diagnosed, it's difficult to treat. There are a few drugs, not too effective. What if we can, with scans available today, scan the brain and figure there are plaques 10 or 20 years before the patient develops symptoms? Maybe then you can start them on drug therapies or other things early. Or without even a scan now, you can use eye tracking, a $100 eye tracker in an app, and use eye motion to detect and predict who's likely to develop dementia 10 years later. Or, as was published earlier this year, blood-based tests. So new ways maybe to blend that information in early and be proactive as we move forward. How about disrupting the world of cardiology through new technologies? You all know the old angiogram. Well, there's companies, for example, HeartFlow, that spun out of Stanford, that can now do a 30-second scan of the heart and do a virtual angiogram, send your data to the cloud, and compute how narrow is the patient's blood vessel. What kind of flow does it have? What TIMI flow? Will patient benefit from a bypass, or maybe from a stent? What kind of stent? Maybe that stent will be 3D printed to match the exact anatomy of that patient. That's going to change the way we do diagnostics, and maybe the payments for some of our cardiology friends. Or in replacing the echo, another Stanford spinoff can do a 5-minute cardiac MRI, completely reconstruct the anatomy of the patient's chest and all the functions of the heart, and this will, I think, will replace the echo. And that was just FDA approved, and the prior technology likely within the next few months. So new ways to do minimally invasive or non-invasive diagnostics will shift our understanding of our own and our patients' disease states. How about blending exponentials? Focused ultrasound combined with real-time fMRI can knock out uterine fibroids, is now being studied in metastatic disease to the liver, and maybe the true future of non-surgical surgery. So blending exponentials. One of the most powerful technologies that's shifting everything in healthcare, including, I think, for pharmaceutical development and clinical trials, is that of mobile, right? 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I was a hem-onc fellow, I basically had a Palm Pilot. But now, it's only been four years since tablets came out, that every medical student at Stanford gets an iPad their first day of school with their entire curriculum on it. And the digital natives who are now training have a new mindset about how they access information. And this information is being democratized. The cheapest tablets on the planet, I was just in India, are being sold for $35, the $35 Android tablets. And in a couple years, they'll be as fast as our best Samsung Galaxies. But imagine you can give those to patients as part of your clinical trials, or to lower socioeconomic patients to be on top of and engage with their data. So we're seeing the dissolving and disappearance of some technologies into these mobile devices. You won't buy a GPS unit anymore. You'll download the free app. You won't buy a flashlight. You'll have the free app for that, right? In fact, Google's now making next-generation smartphones that are modular. So we're blending mobile with diagnostics. So this is, again, not even the future. There are mobile phone connections now that can be a connected glucometer. Diabetes, very data-dependent. If a diabetic patient can own their own data, see their dashboard, maybe even share that with their endocrinologist or primary care physician, they can have a huge impact on the disease. In fact, there's simple apps now where you record the patient records their sugar, their primary doctor sees the number, and using that simple feedback loop, reduced the hemoglobin A1C by 2 percentage points. In fact, this company was the first to have an FDA-approved prescribable app that's reimbursed. So the new drug is actually oftentimes the engaged, empowered patient who's using some of these tools, and we're nearing a time where with the drug or by itself, we'll prescribe the app. There's an app for pregnancy, there's an app for your pre-op care, there's apps for making restaurant reservations, now there's apps for making doctor reservations. That's shifting how we access care and the transparency element as well. I used this system just a few months ago. I had a tiny little lump on my neck, and doctors are the worst patients, so I downloaded an eye derm app, took a picture of my lesion, described it, paid $12. 10 minutes later, a dermatologist came back with my likely diagnosis. Like, great, I'll go find a good plastic surgeon in Palo Alto where I live, and found a good one with ratings, made the appointment, filled out the forms. 2 apps in 1 visit. Here's my clinical case, there's a lump, there's the pre-op, here's the surgery, here's the path, all done in 2 apps in 1 visit, and hopefully a good outcome, right? So that sensibility, some of this appification of healthcare is going to shift how you engage with your health, how you can engage with tracking your trials, your drugs at post-market. Every clinical specialist has their own version. We're seeing crowdsourcing apps, so you can be the first responder if someone has an issue across the convention center, for example. We're seeing pharma companies build apps specific to certain conditions and prescribing them with the drugs in some cases. We're seeing triage apps where you can figure out maybe what's happening without seeing the doctor right away, or which emergency room has the shortest wait time. And increasingly, payers are getting into the loop. So they're engaging their patients to be more proactive about their health. And when they do have issues in their prescribed drugs, and we all know that compliance and adherence is an issue, Walgreens, for example, has made an app that's probably made the most money of any app on any of the app stores because it's dramatically increased refill rates with a push notification and easy ability to do refills. So new worlds that are appified, that are shifting the world of engaged care. And even inpatient and outpatient care is being influenced. And we're starting to see interesting outcomes, like this Mayo study showing a reduction in readmissions with folks who are sent home with a pretty simple feedback loop. So these are new modalities that are, again, engaging the patient and the physician and pharmacist and beyond. And sometimes, in some cases, gamifying healthcare, adding incentives to join the gym or quit smoking or do more steps, or use off-the-shelf technologies for things like physical therapy, using something like a Microsoft Kinect that's off the shelf to track something that's often not tracked and make it more fun, like PT after shoulder surgery. Or other new technologies that can measure finger motions and use that for a surgeon to manipulate images seamlessly in the operating room, or a disabled patient to interact with her environment. Lots of new ways to take off-the-shelf magical electronic technologies and apply them into healthcare. And a lot of this is being termed connected health or digital health. The fact that this scattered information is now becoming accessible in different forms has a lot of potential opportunity, because these devices are again becoming connected to our mobile devices, whether it's a smartphone case that can do eye diagnostics, which is being piloted in India, or a connection for my smartphone. So I'm trained in pediatrics, I send a patient home with an otoscope and they can look in their ear and send the pictures back and do follow-up. Or in the cardiac world, for example, one of my favorite examples is this now FDA-approved technology called the AliveCore EKG that I can simply snaps onto your smartphone case. And now I just hold my smartphone case and I can do a live EKG from wherever I might be. So if I'm a patient with AFib and I want to track my rhythms, any cardiologists here? Looks a little funny. That's being stored and sent to the cloud. And I don't even need to be a cardiologist anymore to read that image. I can actually pay $2 and have it analyzed by a real cardiology tech or a cardiologist and sent back to me and my physician. So new ways of accessing what used to be complicated, 12-lead EKGs in the clinic, can be done in some cases very reliably with a smart connected device like this. How about connecting other technologies? I have a newborn at home. The future might be futuristic with a connected diaper, but that's not so futuristic anymore because actually Huggies just came out with Tweet Pee. You can figure out what that does. There's also data for number 2, sometimes too much information. But, this is available today. In fact, my son was doing his part for science. He wore a connected onesie a couple months ago, and I don't need that yet to track his information. But if I'm sending a newborn home from the intensive care unit in the NICU or PICU, that kind of information can be valuable, and it's going to change how we, again, connect and acquire big data or home data or personalized data and make it hopefully actionable going forward. In fact, there's even versions for your, not just Fitbits, but Petbits to track your other favorite companions. So part of this is this ingrained world of what's often called quantified self. How many folks here have worn a Fitbit or something like that? About 5%. I've got like 6 of them on right now. I don't usually wear this money, but you get the idea. These are simple, low-cost wearable devices that can track your steps, connected scales that will tweet your weight. Watches now. This one was just acquired by Intel for $100 million. This tracks time, my steps, my calories, and my heart rate. It has a heart rate detector. In the future, I might prescribe this to a patient who has a beta blocker and be able to use this to manage their heart disease in smart ways. And of course, you've all seen that the Google Watch is coming that has an accelerometer and heart rate detection, and we'll probably have a whole slew of health apps that are now being connected by technologies like HealthKit. And the fact that Apple and Google and Samsung are all getting into this space, and that this data will soon be integrated back into the EMR or potentially clinical trials, will be a very powerful element, I think, moving forward in the consumer empowerment and our ability to capture data in the wild and make sense of that for drug development. Just managing hypertension. 1 in 3 Americans has hypertension, but less than 1 in 3 have that, or less than half have that control. Now there's connected blood pressure cuffs you can buy at an Apple store or in Best Buy. What if you could prescribe those to your patients, which you could today, and use that to do a better job with hypertension? Or wheezometers that can track wheezing, for example. And if a patient's using a new inhaler, maybe you can track when and where they've used it with a little GPS cap that says, okay, they've used it here, here's the whole population. Maybe everyone on your clinical trial is tracking this, so you get situational awareness as you track and modify a clinical trial, and use that information in powerful ways. In fact, I think these will be the future of clinical trials, where you'll send the patients an app which helps them track their disease and their progress, and maybe a device, let's say in Parkinson's, to track tremor or some other symptoms that feed back to the trialist, to the patient, to the physician, and help improve and speed up trials and clinical outcomes. Now, these technologies are disappearing into our watches, into our phones. There's wearable tattoos. I'm actually wearing a patch right now, a $2 a day disposable from a company down the street from me called Vital Connect. I'm wearing it right here. It's actually talking to my smartphone. We'll see if the live demo works. This is always dangerous. Here you're seeing my live data. Here we go. That's my data from my phone here, and I'm moving around. You're seeing my steps. My stress level is only 99%. Thanks, guys. My posture, it'll track my posture. If I fall down and I don't get up, I can call my mom or call 911, all right? That's a lot of streaming data. Who's going to be liable for it is a question, but soon we'll be able to make sense of this and have ICU level type data from anywhere, anytime, from almost any patient. So lots of powerful data. How we use it is still going to be a challenge. We're going from wearables to insidables. They're swallowable pills that are replacing upper endoscopies. They can take pictures on their way down. And we all know the challenge of IV injection and infusions. There are new pills that are being developed that you can swallow and will do the injections in the mucosa and maybe replace and be a new form of drug administration. So from wearables to insidables, Google, of all companies, is making a contact lens that can measure glucose and report that through a mobile device. And they're partnering with Novartis to make that to get that to the market for diabetics. So new technologies and new tools are coming into play to provide information. I think the near future will be, I'll prescribe you a wearable, an app, with your drug, or prescribe a patient exercise and get that information back, and that will help incentivize and change behavior. Now, it's not just vital signs. We're now seeing the explosion of small micro labs, point of care diagnostics, microfluidics. Some are going to come to our pharmacies and disrupt the blood testing industry in powerful ways. We're seeing versions in my world of oncology where maybe 10,000 biomarkers can be done from a drop of blood, and we'll hopefully be more proactive about picking up cancers earlier or doing other sorts of screening. For infectious diseases, here or in the developing world, there's now point of care devices that can detect malaria, or simple devices that can be a point of care urinalysis. This is basically a UA on a dipstick with a QR code. You dip in your urine, you take a picture with the app, and it gives you a very objective urinalysis. Or it might be influenza season or Ebola season, and you can spit in a tube with your saliva and hopefully detect that remotely without bringing in yourself to the clinic and infecting others, as another point of care way of tracking a disease or other clinical metrics. In fact, some of these can actually be printed at the point of care, and this group from WIS just published last week a paper-based version for saliva and Ebola. So new technologies will hopefully change the way we pick up and treat and manage pandemics. So we're entering an era of clinical trials and digital checkups almost from anywhere, whether it's vital sign data, laboratory data, the ability then to interact with your physician. In the near future, I think 50% of your clinical visits will be done by e-visits, basically, through your smartphone. There's 10 companies that launched within the last 2 years where you can pay $20 on your credit card and have a visit with a clinician, sometimes a specialist. Maybe your own doctor will even get reimbursed for this in the near future. That could be part of clinical trial management as well. Not everyone has to come into their labs and have their check-ins. Now, these technologies are great. I hope they don't get in the way of, let's say, the patient-doctor relationship. They can enable it. This layering of technologies has huge opportunities, but also has interesting challenges, right? There's new connected pacemakers, for example. You might have heard that our former Vice President Dick Cheney famously turned off his pacemaker. He was afraid it might have been hacked. Might have been a good thing, depending on your political equation. But what happens when someone hacks your pacemaker or your insulin pump? Or who owns the data from your genomics or your own implants? My friend Hugo has an implantable defibrillator. The company who made it wouldn't give him his own raw data. What if you could own your data and elect to share it and crowdsource it in interesting, empowering ways? And with all this big data, all of us are overwhelmed now with tweets and Skypes and all this information when you're developing drug trials and there's guidelines if you're a doctor. Our brains haven't had an upgrade in like 2 million years, but all our other things upgrade every month. How do we get smarter about leveraging all this big data? Well, one field that's on the cusp of really shifting things is AI, artificial intelligence, or how I like to frame it more as actually IA, intelligence augmentation. Not to replace, let's say, doctors and nurses, but to augment us, whether we're running a clinical trial or trying to figure out a diagnosis or what drug is most applicable to that patient. When I can see that patient and in real time pull up all the trials and CDC information that's most relevant, and Watson can read, 2,000 journal articles in a few minutes, that can become a really empowering way to enable clinicians anywhere. Sometimes a relatively untrained nurse in a rural village could have access to Watson on their smartphone soon and do a better job of diagnosing than a veteran physician. There must be some Star Trek fans here, right? Remember this? Bones McCoy, the tricorder? Is that science fiction anymore? Well, not really. They're now basically pocket ultrasounds that can do scans that a $100,000 ultrasound could only do a couple years ago. So these modalities are really changing the way we do point-of-care diagnosis. In fact, we're starting to blend those together. I've been on the team with the X Prize designing a medical tricorder X Prize, a $10 million prize sponsored by Qualcomm to basically make a consumer device at home to measure a whole set of vitals and do a better job than a panel of board-certified physicians at doing early triage and diagnosis, which is going to be hugely impactful. And in fact, over 400 teams entered this competition. They're now in the finalist stages. One of the teams started at my first future medicine company conference 3 years ago called Xanadu. They've developed essentially this medical tricorder. You hold it to your forehead. This is a working version. It talks to your phone. It picks up your temperature, your heart rate, your oxygen sat, your blood pressure, speaks to your phone, understands that information, eventually tracks you, and can start to make sense of that. 10,000 of these are going to ship as part of an FDA trial later this year. And think about where this might go in just a couple of years. It's not just the technology, it's the systems around it. So I introduced Xanadu to a design firm called IDEO, and we made this little movie, let's turn the sound up, that shows where this will likely be in the next couple of years. Take a quick look.
Technology has given us an unprecedented window into the human body. But on a day-to-day basis, we're still in the dark about our own health. We are changing that.
You okay? Do you feel okay?
What if instead of fearing the worst when you notice something out of the ordinary, you could identify the condition yourself? Getting the right diagnosis would save you worry.
It says it's roseola.
And an unnecessary doctor's visit.
Rest at home, it's okay.
Instead of hearing about a viral outbreak on the news, imagine you got an alert that was tailored to your family's needs. It would also give you advice about what to do next. What if you had a way to identify what was wrong right away?
It says it's 103.8.
A way to get all of the information you need to understand the situation. And in serious cases, you would know when and where to seek help.
It recommends taking it to the urgent care.
We're building a way for people to check their bodies as often as they check their email. It's all possible, and it's only the beginning.
Now, the hypochondriacs who check their mail like 200 times a day are in trouble, but this technology is coming and might help the hypochondriacs, and in fact, they crowdsourced the funding of this trial. They broke the record, like $1.6 million in Indiegogo. So new ways of funding medical innovation are coming as well. So it's not just, of course, about the data, it's how we integrate it. Just like your modern car has, hundreds of sensors, you don't pay attention to any one sensor, you care about when your check engine light goes on. What if you had a personal check engine light, basically an OnStar for the body that will start to integrate this, be your personal GPS and guidance. I think as big data and Internet of Things merges, that's what will take us forward. Because we're not just one entity, one car on the road, we're connected, right? The social network becomes incredibly important, whether it's managing diabetes, understanding diabetes, or changing behaviors, right? Behaviors are more impactful than our genetics, actually. And we have new tools to understand and change our behaviors, like tools like Modalities, which is prescribing apps to manage pre-diabetics and change them from turning into diabetics. Or applications made by Crohn's patients to crowdsource Crohn's patients and their information, and even do their own crowdsourced clinical trials. Beer is bad for Crohn's patients. They did their own trial. Anheuser-Busch wasn't going to sponsor that, right? We have augmented reality ways to see maybe future you. What if you could see future you in the mirror, right? Or what happens if you keep having donuts for breakfast, future you, right? I downloaded an app the other day, I could see myself now and maybe, a few hundred donuts later. I changed my diet, right? Or what if I'm counseling a young patient about smoking and show her what her skin will look like? Or if you spend too much time on Facebook, what will happen, right? So we have new tools to change our wiring of our brain. In fact, things like Oculus Rift are coming very quickly, or low-cost versions of that made out of cardboard, which will change our wiring and be useful in all sorts of behavior change elements as we go forward. Telepresent robotics are starting to be part of clinical meetings. In fact, there are low-cost versions that you can round in hospitals with and visit your loved ones. Robotics is changing surgery. It's changing, in fact, some fields like anesthesia. There's robotic anesthesiologists. You can imagine who's getting scared about that disruption. We're seeing robotics play a role in the disabled, for example. There's now brain-computer interfaces, so a patient with quadriplegia can control a robotic limb. So brain-computer interfaces are actually coming to the home. This is a $200 device you can buy today. You can wear this headset. I won't put it on right now, but I can track my brain waves. We've seen kids now train on these to focus and get off of Ritalin. And here's my brain actually being calm for a few minutes. And in the future, I'll prescribe a device like this as a mindfulness exercise to a patient who may benefit from that, as opposed to maybe giving them a benzodiazepine, for example. So lots of new ways of looking into ourselves. And we're seeing wearable exoskeletons as well in the robotics realm. This woman here is wearing, or this person is wearing a robotic exoskeleton. So someone who's paralyzed from the waist down can now walk wearing a device. In fact, parts of that are 3D printed to match your own anatomy. Now, speaking of paralyzed patients, we don't want to just cure let's say spinal cord injury. We want to use, in fact, now we're starting to use stem cells in regenerative medicine. My clinical training is in that field. Shinya Yamanaka on my left there won the Nobel Prize 3 years ago. And we're seeing the stem cell world move very quickly. In fact, stem cells as drugs, just last month, the first clinical trial using induced pluripotent stem cells has moved forward. Stem cells are starting to move and blend with the world of 3D printing. 3D printing is a fast-moving field. It's starting to be applied in healthcare in a variety of ways, from orthopedic devices to make prosthetics that match, crutches. I have in my personalized orthopedic implants. Here's some that can be printed in the hospital. Here's Mini-Me. I carry around a 3D printed version of me in my pocket sometimes. Microsoft Connect, a cheap print. Now that's fun, but if I have a patient who's missing part of their face from cancer and I can make a prosthetic, that's powerful. You're going to meet Tony Atala tomorrow, a friend and colleague of mine, looking at blending 3D printing and regenerative medicine. We can make basic things like tracheas and bladders today, but we're moving into making complex organs like hearts and livers, and you'll hear more about that. Now, I chair the medicine track at a pretty new institution called Singularity University, based in the heart of Silicon Valley, and we look at fast-moving technologies and how we can apply them to addressing big challenges, including in healthcare. And there's been a lot of new entities and companies that are born out of this, from telepresent gloves to new drug screening methods. I run a conference every year called Exponential Medicine, which will be actually in 1 week, just across the bay in Del Coronado. We have a few spaces left. Check out exponentialmedicine.com for like 3 days of what I'm talking about in 30 minutes. So part of the theme of exponential medicine at Singularity University is that it's new thinking. It's people with new mindsets that are coming into healthcare. Google is launching a new healthcare company called Calico. We're seeing new startups and accelerators and mindsets. We're seeing designers get into healthcare to make these things useful, right? Because design thinking is important, whether it's reinventing crutches or a cane, or the systems around a hospital bed, or when you fly an airline, there's sometimes design thinking that's imbued in some airlines rather than another. And I love flying. I've been a pilot and a flight surgeon for the last 15 years. And there are lessons we can take from the aviation world that we can apply to medicine and pharma. I have had some experience flying in fighter jets, and this aviation lessons, for example, checklists, those have transformed the operating room, how we do drug trials, how we individualize that for a patient. I think I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to talk faster, okay? Is that okay? So checklists are getting to be imbued, and some of those checklists are becoming personalized and tuned to the individual patient. So you can have one at home that helps you manage a particular condition and learns you over time. We're seeing simulation change the way we train our pilots, right? Flying has gotten a lot safer. Now most surgeons are being trained and medical students, not just on individual procedures, but on teams and how they come together, responding to codes in a trauma room. And that's a sim center we have at Stanford. And how clinical trials are being done, as many of you know, are being designed and piloted first in silico. In fact, some clinical trials are being done on a chip. This whole blending of regenerative medicine and organs on a chip is changing how we might screen drugs before they even get to phase 1 and beyond. So lots of new opportunities to blend these as we go forward. How about heads-up display? How do we see new data? This is the old cockpit, same airplane, but a glass cockpit. We use the heads-up display in the fighter pilot world, and that's being infused into clinical care. Because with a heads-up display, you're not looking in the cockpit, you're paying attention to the outside world, and you have different data if you're flying in bad weather, maybe about to run into a mountain, and sometimes bitching Bob talks to you and reminds you that you're about to run into a mountain, says pull up. Or we have different information if we're in a dogfight. Or when you have dashboards in your car, you have feedback loops that changes your driving behavior. In fact, imagine again that GPS, it's personal to you. It says, Daniel, go right to the gym, not left to McDonald's. That's going to be a new sort of cue. And we need to make that data tuned and personalized to us, not overwhelming, at the same time. So that's not science fiction either, because we're now having our own heads-up displays. We're now in the world of Google Glass, and one of the best use cases for what's still a bit of a nerdy device is in healthcare, right? We're seeing all sorts of use cases, particularly in healthcare, where I can walk into a patient's room and have the electronic medical record come to me, or I can ask Dr. Glass about the differential diagnosis for something, or as a surgeon, I can see data about that patient and a checklist and scans without taking my view off of what I'm doing clinically. So we're seeing all sorts of applications, from scribing to ways for patients to track their data. Medical students are being given these at UC Irvine and are going to be innovating on these. We're seeing patients start to use these to track drugs and exercise. In fact, you may see your breakfast in one way soon and a breakfast in another way with your donuts, and you might change your behavior. In fact, you might have other clues as well. It may remind you to pull up, a little cue before you dive in. Last example will be radar. What if, as part of your clinical trials, or you could follow all the patients and how they were doing and see where the thunderstorms were and where the challenges were? What if we could start to crowdsource that sort of data? Just like when you drive with Google Maps or Waze, you're sharing a little bit of privacy in your speed and location. In exchange, you can build a map of Rome, Rome in a day. This is just driving data, building a map of Rome and letting folks understand where the traffic jams are, and they get data back, right? The new routing, avoiding the traffic jams. You get something back. So I think that perception of crowdsourcing clinical trials or diagnoses, is a company called CrowdMed, just published today in Nature, was a crowdsourced analysis of ALS patients, and they found the folks who figured out new algorithms better than the clinicians and the clinical trialists. So new ways of maybe thinking about how you design trials by crowdsourcing that information and new algorithms. So in summary, with all these fast-moving tools, we're changing the way we think about clinical work, trial development, and beyond, because in some sense we've been flying sort of blind. We have a whole new set of data. Our social network data even can tell us what's happening around us in terms of infectious disease and other issues. So soon we can maybe tell who to shake hands with or not shake hands with at certain times. That data there, and Facebook is starting to mine that, believe me. We'll have new dashboards into our health and those of our communities, and we can shift health and biomedicine and pharmaceutical development from one that's been very episodic and reactive to a new world that's much more continuous and proactive. And so I encourage you, as we look into this brave new world and you think about pharmaceutical industry and drug development of 2020, to be data donors, not just drug and organ donors. You can be a data donor individually. Your companies and academic groups can be. We can shift the way we interact with that information. We can shift fields like mine of oncology, where every tumor will soon be sequenced, and we'll use technologies like IBM Watson to figure out the right cocktail. This N of 1 era of medicine, synthetic biology blending with this as well. And I think, as a close, I hope you all start to think a little bit exponentially. Look, like Wayne Gretzky says, where the puck is going. Don't think about 2014 technology. Think about where things will be in 2016 and how that's going to reinvent all sorts of elements in your life. And start to look at the blend and overlap of all these exponential and fast-moving technologies and how they may play a role in reinventing health and medicine. So in closing, realize that in many ways the future's already here. Like my Google Glass, it's just not evenly distributed. And it's up to us who are really blessed to touch the healthcare world in some way, not to just go out there and predict the future of medicine and pharma, but to go out there and create it together. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for your attention, and open questions. And I'll just say in closing, there's a lot of information there. If you'd like to email me at daniel@singularityU.org, I'd be happy to send you a set of those slides and share some other information. So thanks again. All right. Oh, we're not done yet. I'm supposed to stay here. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Kraft. It's certainly been an honor to have you this evening, and we'd like to present you with the token of appreciation from AAPS.
Thanks. Wow. Thank you.